9 says, and finally, comma, in this part of the process, we see God's punishment, colon, quote, after having brought a flood, and then underlined, upon the world of the ungodly, period, end quote. So, Protestants, we see God's punishment after having brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, and upon the world of the ungodly is underlined, period, end quote. Subpoint A. The aorist tense, aorist is A-O-R-I-S-T, the aorist tense of epago, E-P-A-G long O, tells us that the flood preceded the action of the main verb, or the quote preserving, period, end quote. That's why we start off, that's what we have after having. Okay. This simply means that Noah and his family could not be saved from the flood before the flood. This is an analogy to salvation in general. Colon. The reason man is born in a fallen state is that salvation could not be applied to a man who is not fallen. Jack used to use the demonstration of saving someone from drowning. You can't save someone from drowning who's not in the water. Okay, they have to be drowning before you can save them from drowning. And so in our case, okay, if a baby was born, okay, and it hadn't had the Adam's original sin applied to it, if it was not born in a fallen state, and it didn't fall until it committed its first act of personal sin, then if the baby died before it performed its first act of personal sin, then it couldn't be saved. It couldn't go to heaven because it still had an old sin nature. We're all born with an old sin nature and wasn't perfect. Okay, so because it lacked perfection, it couldn't go to heaven. But because it hadn't been sin, and because it hadn't been in a fallen state and been able to have salvation applied to it, then it couldn't go to heaven either. So it would be in limbo, right? And we know there is no such thing as limbo. Okay, God would not do that. So if a baby dies before it reaches the point of accountability, God can automatically apply salvation to it. How do we know that? We know that from the account of David. Remember when David raped Bathsheba, the result was that a baby was born. Okay, the baby lived long enough to have the breath of life, so it wasn't stillborn; it was born. And but it was born in a state where it was dying. And as you recall, David was wearing sackcloths and covered himself with ash and stuff. What you do when someone has died is what that's what they used to do, tore his garments and everything. He was mourning for the baby and praying that God would save the baby. God chose not to. The baby died, and then David changed back into normal clothes, and his immediate advisors around him said, "Oh, king, what are you doing? When the baby was still alive, you were mourning, but now that it's dead, you're not mourning anymore." And David's reply was, "I've done this because I know I'm going to go to meet the baby." So since David was a believer, well, he doesn't go to meet, he says, "I'm going to see it again." So David understood that the baby had gone to heaven because he knew that he was going to go to heaven, or in the case before the cross, into paradise or Abraham's bosom. Okay, being Jews, they'd be going to Abraham's bosom. Okay, so the idea is that the baby who dies before the age of accountability, because remember, it's all about volition. The baby that dies before it can use its volition gets salvation automatically applied to it, and that couldn't happen if they didn't sin, if they weren't fallen before it was applied. So that's the same thing we have here with the flood. Okay, so God couldn't save Noah and his family from the flood before the flood actually occurred. So last sentence, everything I just gave you, I had written in words, but I don't need to make it slow enough for you to get it. You've heard it before multiple times, but we'll finish with the last sentence. God could not have spared Noah and his family if there was not a judgment from which to be spared. See, I almost said if there was not a judgment to be spared from, and then I remembered you're not supposed to end a sentence in a preposition. So, so my high school English comes into mind. Okay, so God could not have spared Noah and his family if there was not a judgment from which to be spared. Period. Subpoint B. The other thing to note is that the word kataklusmos, that's Kataklusmos, kataklusmos, literally means, quote, coming down in waves, end quote. Which tells us of the violent nature of the flood. This was not a gentle rain for 40 days and nights, but a catastrophic flooding of water. This also alludes to the fact that the water did not all come from the rain. As that much water upon the ark would flood or cave it in. This is the idea where logically, then the logical conclusion is that water had to come from somewhere, so it probably came up from the deep as well. So open up all the floodgates underneath, as well as on the sky, because if you're going to have enough water to cover the entire Earth, and you're going to do it in 40 days and 40 nights, and it's coming down violently, you're going to cave in the roof of the ark, or you're going to flood the ark, or whatever. If all that water came down just from the sky, so there's the idea that it also came up from the bottom. Okay. There's a whole new controversy coming out called the New Earth controversy, right? And believe it or not, there are doctrinal churches that are going and teaching they are no longer accepting the gap theory, and they're teaching that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and that were potentially dinosaurs on the ark. So I will tell you right now, we don't believe that. Okay. But there are doctrinal churches that are teaching the new earth that says that the earth is only 6,000 years old. We don't know how old the earth is, because if you believe the gap theory, it was created, and Adam and Eve could have lived in the Garden of Eden for 1 billion years without committing a sin. We don't know how long they lived without committing a sin, because the earth didn't change and start deteriorating until after they fell. Okay. So anyway, it would have flooded it or caved it in. Continuing the point. Additionally, the violence of the flood was necessary to keep the super race of Nephilim from being able to swim or tread water to survive. They were literally swept away in the waves and drowned. See, if it was a gentle rain for 40 days and 40 nights, you have the Nephilim, who obviously can hike, they can climb, they can do all kinds of things, right? And in 17 days, or in 14 days, Thomas and I hiked, in Philmont, hiked for, about 80 miles, 70, a little over 70 miles. I was going to say 80 miles, but it put too much to it. Just a little over 70 miles, right? And that was, I wouldn't say leisurely, but it wasn't a strenuous either. We weren't just trying to hike for our lives, right? But if you figure out the Nephilim, they could have climbed to the very tops of the mountains and waited until the last couple days before they drowned. But the idea is that isn't what happened. This was enough rain coming down fast enough and with enough violence that they couldn't tread water, and they couldn't swim, and they couldn't climb necessarily, all climb to the higher ground. It's a pretty pretty dynamic cataclysm, and we don't tend to think of it that way when we read it. When you read it in the children's Bible stories, you always see a nice little Noah and his wife and a couple animals, furry bunny rabbits and stuff climbing up in the ark, but it wasn't that. It was pretty darn violent, right? And you can imagine that it was pretty scary. Subpoint C. And the last emphatic phrase, and that's upon the world of the ungodly, emphasizes the fact that those who perished were indeed unbelievers. As believers, I'm probably going a little too fast, I'll slow it down. Okay, so it is the fact that those who perished were indeed unbelievers. As believers, we can have confidence that we will never be treated like the unbeliever. God was just in punishing the ungodly. Subpoint 1. In addition to punishing them, comma, he also preserved the earth for the remainder of the angelic conflict. So once again, we can see that Satan, as the ruler, the current ruler of the planet Earth, remember he took it over from Adam, Satan as the ruler of planet Earth did not understand what he was doing. By creating the Nephilim, he could have destroyed the entire world. I mean, when you have a superpower on a planet that wasn't designed for superpower, you could have all kinds of problems. And so by unleashing the attack, he could have completely destroyed the Earth, thus improperly ending the courtroom case, which of course is one of the things he also wanted to do. And if there's no more case, then he's won the angelic conflict, right? So God, as the judge, stepped in to enforce the rules, right? So you can add that last sentence. So we have, he also preserved the earth for the remainder of the angelic conflict. God, as judge, stepped in and enforced the rules. Like I said before, I like watching these nature shows sometimes because I really am fascinated by the fantastic creativity, obviously, the divine creativity of God. When you look at some of the animals that we're not used to seeing, and you see some of the beautiful colors of the birds and some of the beautiful colors of, butterflies and other animals, right? It's amazing. I talked about that blue-tongued skink is what it was called. I remembered what the name was finally. The blue-tongued skink is the name of the lizard, and then Melissa sent me a picture of a blue-footed booby, which is a bird that has blue feet. So God had a sense of humor when he made these things, right? If you don't think he has a sense of humor, the classic example is the duck-billed platypus, right? It's a mammal that lays eggs. Figure that one out. Okay, it's the only mammal that lays eggs. But anyway, but the problem is with these nature shows on PBS, because it's money that that TV you love to pay for. They always have to throw in the fact that man is destroying the environment, and it's too bad that these things aren't going to live forever because man is such a horrible person. Okay, subpoint 2. Additionally, note that the phrase does not say, comma, quote, the ungodly, end quote, but says, quote, the world of the ungodly, period, end quote. This tells us that the whole world, with the exception of the 8, were unbelievers and worthy of punishment. But it also tells us, but it also tells us that once again, earth suffers the punishment of creatures' malfunction. with the fall of the angels, comma, excuse me, yeah, with the fall of the angels, comma, the earth underwent punishment and had to be restored. Genesis 1, 1 and 2. So the earth underwent punishment as a result of the creatures upon it. Then, with the fall of man, the earth underwent punishment. With the loss of perfect environment, and the onset of weeds, violent animals, etc. Genesis 3, 17 through 19. And then with this incident, the earth experiences another transformation. And weather is never again the same. See, what's been deduced is that rain has become more prevalent. Storms and natural destruction comes into existence. Okay, things like that. But God, of course, has to remind us that although these things that now occur, we never have to fear a flood destroying the earth. Okay, so the weather will never again be the same. But we never have to fear that a flood will destroy the earth. Genesis 9, 13 through 17. Genesis 9, 13 through 17. That? It is unfortunate that the sign of God's covenant is now used by satanic perverts to represent their perversion. It used to be when I was a kid, the bookstore, Christian bookstores and places like that used to sell, decals that were essentially a rainbow with a little cross in the center, right? To tell you God's covenant that He's not going to flood the earth. That's the rainbow, right? The rainbow is to tell us whenever we see a rainbow after a storm or during the rain or whatever, that's to inform us that we don't have to fear that it's going to turn into a flood, right? And they used to, sell those things as, to put on your car to, represent that you're a Christian and that you believe in God's covenants and stuff. Now you put that on there, you're going to be blamed of being a Christian faggot. And that's unfortunate. Okay. Point 10. Verse 5 gave us the second category of the protasis, comma. Reinforcing God's justice. And the fact that he punishes those who refuse to believe period. So don't forget that this is part of Peter's response to those who would question why God doesn't immediately punish the false teachers and those who would accuse God of being soft. Okay, so this is the continuation of that protasis. And we're going to be ready for verse 6 here, where we'll see another example of God's justice. But before we do that, we're going to first get a couple different things. One is associated with horns, and the other one is going to be a biography of Noah. But first, let's get verse 5 all together. It says, "And if he did not spare the ancient world, but protected Noah, a proclaimer of righteousness, and 7 others, after having brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly," semicolon. Okay. And before we go into a biography of Noah, or actually go into the next verse, one of the two, I need to take another little bit of a side journey. In point 5D, subpoint 3 of the analysis above, I stated there are 7 dispensations or periods of time, which is made clear in Revelation 5:6. And I didn't give you the passage in the statement, and I said I would. But more importantly, I didn't state how the horns make it clear that there are 7 dispensations. It's something that we've been taught, something I've been saying for many, many years, and never really proven it as to why that happens. And in fact, it's in our doctrinal statement, which I was asked to send to Westside Bible Church. I sent my doctrinal statement. And so they came back with a question, which was also asked to me by someone in the congregation here, as to why the 7 horns tell us that we have 7 dispensations, right? And so since I was questioned by both a church member as well as the search committee at Westside, I thought, you know what? This would be a really good time to address that. So we're going to get the passage first, and then we're going to go into a category of horns, which I don't think we've ever had before. At least I could never find one. So you're getting a new creation, okay, of the category of horns, okay? But first, let's go ahead. I think we have time let's get Revelation 5:6. This is the passage that I cited as the reason that there's 7 dispensations. Now, what's interesting is if you go to Colonel Theme and you look up dispensations, he's going to tell you there's 6, right? And he mixes actually dispensations and what we call ages. If you look up Schaeffer Theological Systematic Theology by Louis Perry Schaeffer, he's going to have 7, but he also mixes ages with civilizations, with dispensations. I think the original work from Jack, Pastor O'Brien, that actually divided church, the civilizations, the ages, and the dispensations. I'm pretty sure that's original work that has not been done before. He did a very, very good job of showing the difference between each of those things and what made each of those things different. Because in some of them you have crisscrosses and all kinds of things, and in ours it's very, very crisp, okay? And part of it, the key was this verse. So Revelation 5:6 starts off, "Then I saw." And here we start with the conjunction kai, meaning basically and, but it can also mean even and yet or but. And then when used in a sequence, it's then. This is followed by the aorist active indicative, first person singular of horao. Remember, harao means to see, to view, or to perceive. It's a panoramic view. Blepo is a glance, is a click, a quick look. Harao is more of a concentration on and a long look. So here what we have is John is continuing with the contents of his vision. We have the aorist tense telling us that this action was a completed action, and that the active voice tells us that it's John who's doing the seeing, and the indicative mood is a mood of reality. So John is really seeing this vision as something that is really going to occur. This is a prophetic vision, and this tells us that this is what will happen. Then we have between the throne and the open parens. This doesn't have any lines in it. This is actually in the Greek. Between the throne with the four living creatures and the elders. Here we have an idiomatic construction. We start with the phrase en meso. E-N-M-E-S long O, en meso. And this is starts with the preposition en, meaning in or with or to. And then we have the genitive adjective mesos. And mesos means middle. Okay, and so within, it's in the middle of. And then it comes to mean between. But we're going to see that in the Greek idiom, they actually place what's between, in between this phrase, between, twice. Okay, so this phrase actually gives us the parentheses. Next, we have the masculine genitive singular of the articular noun thronos, which is transliterated into English meaning throne. Of course, with the article, we have the throne. Next, we have a phrase that identifies the throne. We start with another kai, followed by the articular noun modified by an articular noun, modified by an adjective. And the adjective is the neuter genitive plural, and it's the cardinal adjective, tesseres. T-E-S-S-A-R-E-S, tesseres. And tesseres means four. Remember, ordinal would be fourth, cardinal is four. And then the articular noun is the neuter genitive plural of the noun zao, which we've seen many, many times. And zao means living. And in the neuter plural, we have living creatures, living things. So with the conjunction, article, and adjective, we have and of the four living creatures. But here, and I'll give it to you as it is literal, and then we'll clean it up. Then we have kai again, followed by en meso again. And then we have the masculine genitive plural of the noun presbyteros. And we've seen presbyteros when we've talked about pastor or teacher in the various names for pastor teacher. But here presbyteros means elders. So literally what we, so that this phrase means and in the middle of the elders. So literally what we have is in the middle of the throne and of the four living creatures and in the middle of the elders. And so the and in the middle of tells us that it is setting this stuff off. So we have the real parentheses. So we have between the throne with the four living creatures and the elders. And the reason with the throne with the four living creatures is in parentheses is in order to understand this, we have to go and understand Revelation 4, 3 through 9. So you can put that in your reference. Because in Revelation 4, 3 through 9, we have the four living creatures in the throne, and they're described as four angelic heralds proclaiming the Lord. And they're described, as eagle and lion and two other things. And then we also have 24 very senior angelic creation sitting around the throne, and those are the elders. So he's just picking up from what he saw, what he said he saw in Revelation 4, 3 through 9. So that helps us to understand this passage a little bit better. Between the throne with the four living creatures and the elders, a young ram. That's usually translated lamb because we have Lamb of God, but it is of course a reference to the Lord Jesus Christ. But the ram was the one that was sacrificed. You go all the way back to Abraham when he was ready to sacrifice Isaac. You had a ram, and the ram was captured in the thorns by its horns, right? And the idea was the horns will represent power, and the ram is caught with its own power, okay, in the thorn bush. And I'll get to that later on when we get into horns, okay? But we have a young ram. Here we have a neuter accusative singular of Arnion. And Arnion is the diminutive or derivative of Arain, A-R long E-N, meaning sheep. And this diminutive derivative gives us the concept of young, and the fact that it has horns, which we're going to see, gives us the fact that it's a ram. Now, there are strains of sheep where the female sheep have horns, but in the Bible, the indication of horns is done usually to indicate a male sheep as opposed to a female lamb. Okay, so you have a ram and a lamb. Okay, but we do know, for example, with our here in the desert, for example, we have the bighorn sheep. Bighorn sheep, females will actually have horns. Okay, but in the Bible, the idea is it's a ram that has the horns. And this reference obviously refers to the Lord Jesus Christ, with emphasis on his volition in going to the cross as the sacrifice for sin for all mankind. See, he is the sacrificial lamb. That's what he's being represented as here. Isaiah 53, 7 and 8. John 1, 29 and 36. Acts 8, 32. 1 Peter 1, 19 and 20. Next, we have a relatively long phrase. Especially considering it's made up of 3 words, but in the English, we have standing as one having been killed as a sacrifice. But your general translators don't have anything like that. They may allude to it, but this is exactly what it means. Standing as one having been killed as a sacrifice. We start here with the perfect active participle, neuter accusative singular. I know it's a lot of vocabulary, okay, but it's the verb histemi, H-I-S-T long E-M-I, histemi. And it means to stand, to put in place, to place. The perfect active participle, the reason I give you all this vocabulary, the perfect active participle gives us action that's happening with consequences that go on. In other words, he was sacrificed for us, and his sacrifice goes on for all eternity and pays for the sins of all mankind. The participle is used as an adjective describing the ram. See, participles are verbs that are used as either adjectives or adverbs. Sometimes when they're used as adjectives, they're also used as substantives. So it's a case where you can have a verb turn into a noun. We do that in English with a gerund. We say running is fun. We turn a verb to run into a noun, running, and then we can use it as a noun in a sentence. Okay, that's what that means when you get through all the vocabulary muckety muck. Okay, so here we simply have standing. Okay, Then we have the comparative particle hos, meaning like or as. And here, obviously, we have as. And then we have the perfect passive participle, another participle, neuter accusative singular of the verb sphadzo, S-P-H-A-D-Z, long O, sphadzo. And this word doesn't just mean to slay, doesn't mean just killed. It means to slay by cutting the throat. The word specifically means to slay by cutting the throat. And of course, it's used for the act of sacrificing. So you sacrifice a lamb or you sacrifice any animal by slicing the throat of that animal. See, that's what happened between Cain and Abel, right? Cain slit the throat of Abel to sacrifice him to God. He was so mad when God didn't accept his offering. He said, okay, God, how about this? You want an animal sacrifice? I'll sacrifice an animal for you. And he sliced his brother's throat. He didn't just hit him over the head with a rock, or push him off a cliff or, put him in a pit, a bungee pit or anything like that. He killed him by slicing his throat. And so this word always has the concept of being killed as a sacrifice. So that's what we have here. And the idea is that the Lord Jesus Christ has been killed as a sacrifice. He is the sacrificial young ram, or the sacrificial lamb, if you will. And we have run out of time, unfortunately, because this is where we are going to get into the 7 horns and the 7 eyes. And that's where I was trying to get to. But unfortunately, we're going to have to pick that up and the first Sunday in January. Okay. Because we're only having one class on Christmas. Unless you guys want to hear about eyes and horns. I could do 2 classes. But anyway, we're going to have one class on Christmas. And so therefore, we'll pick it up with this. And unfortunately, first, got 2 weeks to wait. Okay. And then after I get through this verse, we're going to go, like I said, into a category of horns. We're going to see the words associated in the Greek with, in Hebrew with horns and Greek with horns, and go through what they all mean so that we can understand why 7 horns on the head of the ram tell us that there are 7 dispensations. Okay? So let's go ahead and close with a song.